Well, thank you so much, Jody, for joining us on the podcast. I'm unbelievably excited to have you here.
Victoria, stop it. I am so excited to be here. I'm so glad. I love when we can just sit and have a coffee about hard things. And so let's do it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because this is going to be a slightly different format from most of my podcasts, because usually in the episodes, we really dive into like people's career trajectories and how they got to where they are. And I feel like I know a lot of that about you through the Inner Circle podcast, which I'm going to link to so people can hear that story.
Yeah,
But
Carrie Doll.
yeah, but like I was just saying to you, when I told people you were coming on the podcast, they flooded my inbox. So if you don't answer their questions, they're going to be mad at me. So we kind of got to do that.
Yeah, let's do it.
But I do want to start for those who are like just listening to the podcast and they're like, I don't know who Dr. Jody Carrington is, and they will know by the end of this. Tell us a little bit about how you got into the work that you're in.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I'm a child psychologist by training, and I say this quite often, but I don't like kids. I'm not a huge fan of children. I am a huge fan of the people who hold them. And I own 3 kids of my own. I have a set of twins who are 7, and our oldest is 9. So it's fine. I mean, I really like that, but I'm not a fan of kids. And so generally, I think it is the hardest job on the planet. And even as a child psychologist, I thought I had it all figured out until they gave me my own personal child. And now I spend most of my time wondering how I'm going to raise these 3 babies and keep them healthy. And I think, and so when I grew up in a small town in Alberta, and it was actually a teacher who changed my life. So I learned even at 16 how important relationships and connection are. And I wanted just to be a motivational psychologist, a sports psychologist. And so that's how I started on this journey. And then I ended up actually doing an externship with the RCMP. So I was a civilian member with the RCMP for 2 years, just doing some work around psychology. And I fell in love with the idea of trauma and how trauma can blow apart families. And it led to me doing my master's, my PhD in police psychology. And then when I did my residency in Nova Scotia, I had to do a rotation with kids. And then I started to learn a whole lot more about kids and trauma. And so when I came back to Alberta, my first job was at the Alberta Children's Hospital on our Lock Psychiatric Inpatient Unit. And those 10 years really were probably the most humbling. And I learned way more there than I did in grad school. And I met my husband during that time, and we were both old. So we got married and then we got kids really quick. And then I really felt like I've never been more confident in my life. So when I had twins at 38 years old, I then owned 3 babies under 2. I was not still a fan of children. And so I was having a small psychotic break. And so my husband said, I know it'll be helpful. Let's move closer to my mother. Such a good idea. So anyway, so we now live in Olds, just up the road from you, and not very far from my mother-in-law. And I opened a small private practice and started to coach my kids in hockey. That's what I love. And then I started speaking, consulting on the tough kids. My favorite are the kickers and the hitters and the biters and the ones that tell you to fuck off. And primarily it's because nobody understands their story. So I started to consult with school divisions on some of the toughest kids that they own. And then I ended up writing a book about it. And everywhere I go, I'd speak to more and more stages. And the language, so the book is called Kids These Days. And the universal approach to everything I do in life is that it all comes down to relationship and connection. And that it doesn't matter if those of us holding kids or leading a team aren't okay, then the people who are serving don't stand a chance. So it's become a universal language that has really served well. I mean, this morning I just did a conference to Farm Credit Canada and talked to a lot of people in agriculture. I jumped on with the RCMP earlier, or at the end of yesterday, just talking about, of course, stress and PTSD. And so much of my language is universal. And what we're going to talk about today, just how we handle and stress of being parents and, balancing kids and divorcees and babies. It all comes down to the bottom line, right? You got to feel it. You got to name it to tame it. And then you got to stay connected.
And then you add in COVID and it's like, what the hell has happened to us?
Well, and that's just the thing. Like, how about we put in a global pandemic and then a national tragedy? So, yeah. Just if you weren't doing okay before, you really should not be doing okay right now.
Yeah. And so what you often talk about is reconnection and self-regulation. For anyone who's like, what, I never learned about self-regulation from my parents, what is that?
Yeah, it's so interesting. So, I mean, when I say to parents, what do you want for your child? When I've ever asked a parent this, and, you can think about this if your listeners are listening, the very first question anybody asks us is, if you could give your child anything, what do you want for them? And people always say, I want them to be
Happy.
And that's really fantastic. And then if I push parents more, it's like, okay, I want them to be happy, but I want them to like do well in school and have friends and like give back to the community. That's what I'd like. I'd like those three things for our children. I said, cool. The problem is you can't do any of those things well unless you have the capacity to regulate emotion. So the biggest gift that any of us have to give to our children, whether we're educators or parents or grandparents, is really to think about this idea of how do we give our kids the gift of emotional regulation, which is how not to lose your friggin' mind. Because if you can stay calm in times of big emotion, then you will make better choices. You will do better in school. You will be able to navigate relationships. And that's where empathy and compassion lives, is when you're regulated. If you lose your friggin' mind over everything, you have a hard time making friends. You have a hard time staying calm and learning literacy and numeracy, and you have no access to kindness. So emotional regulation, kids are not born with it. None of us are. You are given 3 strategies for free that all mammals have, and us humans have a little bit better, and they're called fight, flight, and freeze. So when you bring a baby home from the hospital, the only way they gotta, sort of let you know what they need is they lose their friggin' mind, right? So they either, show us joy or they cry. And our job as big people is to start to demonstrate emotional regulation. We basically, Ram Dass says this, he's one of my favorite philosophers of all time. He says, we are all just here walking each other home. And basically what he's talking about is, these babies come to us very dysregulated, and they only let us know what they need by losing their minds. And we respond by showing them how to regulate. The second they come out, they typically are crying. And those of us who, love this baby now respond like this. Okay. And we start to show them how to regulate within their first moments of life. And our job, particularly in the first year, is to do a lot of that emotional regulation. We do a lot of, we feed them and we change their bums and we rock and we rock and we rock and we rock. And then we take them for a drive and then we put them on top of the dryer and then we call our mother and then we have a glass of wine. Our basic job is to walk them home through having no skills of emotional regulation. And the more I do it in the physical presence of my child, the less somebody has to do that when I'm not there. I am showing them again and again and again how to do that. And part of the issue, even before COVID that I talked a lot about, is that the biggest issue we face is that we've never been more disconnected in the history of the free world. And the only way you can teach a child, show a child how to regulate emotion is you have to show them. You have to be in their physical presence. And we've never been more disconnected than we are now. And so now as we step into COVID, so many kids struggle with emotional regulation. When I do consults with school boards, the toughest babies are the ones that have difficulty staying calm in times of distress. And the only way you walk them home through it is you can't behaviorally punish kindness into a kid. You can't take away enough stuff from a kid to make them be kind. You got to show them. And the ones who need it the most are the hardest to give it to. Right? So when they lose their friggin' minds again and again and again, that's exactly their job, because you cannot learn how to regulate emotion unless you get dysregulated first. I can practice all day long when you're regulated. I can say, baby boy, what are we going to do when your sister hits you? What are we going to do when, Tommy calls you a name at school? And when they're regulated and they're calm, they look at you and they say things like this. Okay, I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to journal. I'm going to use my words. I'm going to find an adult. You're like, yes, you're amazing. And then 37 seconds later, when their sister calls him a name, they throw punch him, and you're like, what?
We just talked about this. Yeah.
And then we start to question our capacity as parents. We're like, holy shit, what is wrong? Oh my God. Then we Google it. He got the ADHD. That's what he got. He got the ADHD. And then we start to question whether we should have procreated. And then we start to maybe we shouldn't have been parents. See, I should have chose somebody else because that's drunk Uncle Mark's genes that are showing through. This is a disaster. And then when he's good with other people, you're like, holy shit, it's me. It's me. Yeah. Oh my God. I got the compassion fatigue. I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be a teacher. I shouldn't be a parent. It's so not true. And the more disconnected we become, the more we sort of, measure ourselves comparatively on social media. We start to wonder if we're really not doing it right, because what we see on social media is all the family photos where people are together. Yeah. What we see in social media is, this guy played Uno and they made a volcano with a Mentos and they made homemade Play-Doh. Who the shit does that? I don't know. And we don't really see the images of people, without any bra on, screaming at one kid and the other kid starting a fire in a corner and, the other one's hanging off. Like, we don't see those things. And so I think that's part of the issue now, is that we really question our capacity to sit through emotional regulation. And the only way we walk our babies home is to sit through it with them again and again and again.
Yeah. I remember when you said that at the talk, the first time I heard you speak about how we do this comforting for them when they're kids, and then they get a little bit older and it goes out the window. And I was trying to trace it back, and I was saying to my husband, I feel like it's once my son started being very verbal that we're like, oh no, he must understand this stuff now because he has words, and like, why can't you just behave? And we also come from, my husband is British, my parents are Scottish. And so these households are very much like, no, you do what you're told. And my father-in-law was a police officer. That all that in play. And it's like, we just seem to be caught up in this, they should behave a certain way. Why can't we get them to? But also, we're not giving them that comfort. If like, it's such a push-pull.
It's such a dance, right? Because it's like, and then we go the exact opposite. Okay, like, let's just love on everybody. Everybody gets a medal. We're just going to let kids do what they want. You know what? They're so much calmer when they're just on their iPads and they're just free. Like, we just give up, then fine, go play Grand Theft Auto. I don't give a shit. Here's the issue around emotional regulation, is that it is not if you're going to teach, it's when.
Yeah.
And when kids are losing their minds, you're not effective, even if you have the finest consequence or the best speech prepared. Part of the deal is, how do I connect to you, help you regulate, and then I teach, and then I consequence. So timing becomes much more important. The other thing is that it's really necessary. I mean, kids' brains aren't fully developed till they're 25.
Oh,
so even, I know, it's fucking awful. That's why there's wine. And part of the deal is that their job is to flip their lid. And so even, in adolescence, we think, okay, so they look like they're in bigger bodies. They can have articulate conversations. There's some times where they're functioning on all cylinders. And then the next minute, they're surrounded by a bunch of other 15-year-olds who are like, oh shit, man. Yeah. Like, let's eat a Tide Pod. And you're like, you are smarter than that. Like, what are you doing? And the problem is, they are smarter than that when they're regulated, when they're calm, when they're full of, connection to the people they love. But when they're surrounded by peers who are also lid flippers, they don't have a lot of neurotransmitters that keep that prefrontal cortex on. They're like, fuck yeah, let's do it. You know what? I mean, what's the big deal? This is an age-old problem. This isn't new. Our parents were also concerned about us at various points. And we always think, kids these days are getting worse than they've ever been before. It's not true. Kids these days are as beautiful and as amazing and as confident as we were in our generation. We have just never been this disconnected. Yeah. We've never been this disconnected. And the only way you learn how to, worthiness or emotional regulation is via connection. Yeah. So part of the answer, I think, even on the heels of COVID, what I'm concerned most about it in terms of this corona is that there's been the disconnection from those regulating others that our kids often get filled up by. Their hockey coaches, their baseball coaches. Our parents actually do very little of the filling up. It is the village in which we raise our children, because we are so much better with other people's children. Yeah. Like if your baby came through my door and, she said, oh, can I come over after school? And I'd be like, absolutely. And my kids and my kids and your kids come through my door, I am much nicer to your kid, right? My kid throws his boots off. Your kid slams my door, throws his boots against the thing. And I say to my kid, what are you doing? And I say to your kid, oh, do you need a snack, Lovey? Come here, my muffin, right? Because I have less skin in the game with your kid. And I know that they're just, the story in my head is they're kicking their boots off because they're excited to be in my house. The story of my own personal kid is that they're disrespectful and inappropriate, and I am failing them because clearly they're not making good choices. So I should be harder on them. Right? Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
100%.
Yeah. So part of this issue in this place of COVID for me is really like, how do we give each other grace? We are all jacked. We are all losing our mother friggin' minds, including our children. And our kids are only going to be okay if we're okay.
Yeah. And so this taking care of ourselves is so critical, and yet it feels like a challenge right now. But what is interesting is, like you say, we can only teach them by they have to go through it. And so we have all these opportunities if we're working from home with them right now to do that regulation. And you've got 5 keys to reconnection. I am opening my well-worn copy of your book that I highly recommend everyone get a copy of. Can you give us a high-level overview of what those steps are?
Yeah, and I think, it's I mean, all of them are really, I think, important. I think, in light of the COVID, in the corona, what really matters right now is more than anything is really how do we feel this emotion?
Mm-hmm.
How do we really allow ourselves some grace to be like, this does suck? And for some people it doesn't. Some people this is a dream come true, in terms of the slowing down of life. But there is change, and change often causes angst. Mm-hmm. Whether it's good or bad or whatever the deal is. And there's so much emotion right now that I think we have to name, right? Like kids are now not being able to see their friends every day. And, you and I are maybe having, partners who are, putting themselves in danger every single day because they're frontline workers, or, we've just coming off a global tragedy. And so if you own a police officer in your family, I mean, your body's keeping a score, right? The reality is, it's a dangerous job. And so much of that, I think, is just requires us, before we try to fix it and try to come up with a strategy or, do this, this is why it's going to be great, is really just to feel it. And, perception is a function of experience. And, we sometimes don't have a good enough time holding space. We sort of feel guilty if we're like, you know what, I'm so upset because I can't get my hair done. And then I'm mad at myself for that because I'm like, what the shit why are you even feeling that, for God's sake? Like, people are dying and people are going on the front line and you're wean balling over that. Listen, perception is a function of experience. If that's important, if it matters to you, it matters. And when your 7-year-old is like, I just miss my friends, this is awful. And then, your neighbor is a physician and he's like, I'm going to die. I had to decide tomorrow who gets a ventilator between 3 different patients, and I had to choose life or death, right? Perception is a function of experience. As much as that matters to your 7-year-old that he doesn't get to see his kid is as big of an emotion as the guy who's got to pick a vent between 3 patients, right? So if it matters, it matters. Huh? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So being able to name it, to tame it, is so critically important. When we just say, hey, don't you be upset about that. You are fine. Do you know what? There's people who are dying. We really miss an opportunity to be able to hold space for that emotion and then put it in perspective.
Well, and how many of us as adults try not to feel things, right? We'll do any other coping mechanism to not feel something. So to be able to actually teach our kids from a young age, it's okay to feel, and this is how we work through it, we're actually setting them up for so much success down the road, or at least regulation. Success? I don't know.
Absolutely. And I think what's really critical, and we got to cut ourselves some slack in this process. We're going to do the best we can with what we got. We're going to screw this up because we're anxious and overwhelmed and irritable. And I think so much of it is, really, there's data on this. We only need to get this right 30% of the time. You can screw this stuff up 70% of the time. You'll be dysregulated and irritable and overwhelmed and tired and, wishing you never had kids or wishing you never got married or whatever those things are. I mean, that's normal. How do we give ourselves some grace in those situations to then be able to take a deep breath and come back into the game? And I think that's the number one thing. So if you're asking about what are some of the strategies, I talk about a little different in the book, but I think in this period of the corona, I think feeling it is number one. Number two is then really paying attention to what's happening to our physical body in this space, because what'll happen when you start to feel it is your shoulders are up and your breathing is shallow. Mm-hmm. So, wherever your listeners are in this moment, I mean, I'd really encourage you to just drop your shoulders. Yeah. Feel yourself inside your body, right? Because what happened so much, I mean, I woke up this morning and we have a kid in our bed every single second of every single day. Somebody got a tummy ache or somebody doesn't, because they feel it. I mean, the CNN is often on in our house, or I've got some news channel, Aaron and I are talking about, my husband and I are talking about, like, okay, what did you see this? And what about this? And which is great. I think they should be exposed to those things, but we sometimes just sort of overlook the fact that they're taking in things that we don't give them any space to make sense of, right? And so then when I'm laying there in the morning, I have a kid in my arms and I should be relaxed, but I noticed even this morning, Olivia was in our bed and I was like already, like my feet weren't even on the floor. And when I really think like, okay. And it's not an end game, right? You take one deep breath and you think you're good for the day. What I'm doing sometimes these days on the particularly rough days is I even put a reminder in my phone every hour, like the alarm goes off every hour, and I just drop my shoulders. Yeah. Right? How do you relax your belly? I mean, particularly as women, you spend a lot of time sucking in getting our shoulders back. And really, this is a cool thing about being at home, is just like, let her go.
Yeah.
Relax the uterus, man. And when we do that, right, then really we can get back in our bodies, because what's so critically important is anxiety and calmness are not married.
Yeah.
Right. Anxiety and a deep breath will never make out. And I think that's really, because they can't. So much of this is, I want you to feel it, but I also want you to pay attention then to what that does to your body. Those two things have to happen in that order. You feel it first and then relax, and they will go in a cycle. If you try to relax without really naming it, sometimes your body won't allow you to relax because you haven't acknowledged the thing that's kicking you in the ass. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I love what you've been saying about like during COVID or any other time. It really is a case of just constantly having to sort of reconnect and rebalance. And it's okay to go like this throughout the day. It's just about reset, reset, reset.
Yeah, this right now, I think, isn't about good days and bad days. It's about, hard moments and easy moments.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I'm shocked, when somebody can say to me, today was a good day. Like, wow. Because I have good moments, but there's certainly moments. We had a team meeting this morning and I was like, holy shit, like I haven't even thought about these 5 things. And then now this evening, one of my biggest things is that my husband and I play a game of crib every day, and we're smack into Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
And I can, as much as I have on our plates, like that is now what I look forward to, is that we get to get the kids to bed. Not last night, the night before, we were like, okay, it's 8:15, everybody go to bed. And they're like, we're not tired. We're like, we don't care. We have 4 episodes we need to sit in tonight, and you cannot learn how to make a meth lab.
Yeah.
Is this appropriate for you to watch?
It's science at home, right?
Well, you know what I mean. And so this, I feel like, even if the 9-year-old hears it, like, it can't be all bad.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think those are great strategies to really focus on as we're home with this. Now, here's where I want to share a real life gritty, literally going through these moments, and I'm like, Dr. Jody, I don't know what to do. Your book doesn't tell me this specific scenario, so I need the answer. Like many parents, I'm not a single parent, but I often solo parent. My husband will do shift work. I will be home with both the kids. And I know this goes for so many people out there, especially right now if their partners are working in the other room and they're educating and all that kind of stuff. I have a 4-year-old and an almost 2-year-old, and the 4-year-old, they're adorable and awesome. But one of them is also a biter and a kicker and a screamer and all the things. What happens when one hits the other and then they both get dysregulated? They're both upset. They're both crying. Who do you regulate first? Is it seen as favoriting one if you're trying to regulate one before the other? Because you can't seem to do it at the same time. How?
Oh my gosh, right? So I think here's the critical thing that we sometimes miss, is that the role of us as parents is primarily, or caregivers, or whatever the deal is. If you're a hockey coach, who's ever in charge of little people, number one, it is always to be bigger, stronger, kinder, and wise. You're the one who's in control. This is circle security stuff. What I remember all the time is, whenever possible, I want you to follow a lead, and whenever necessary, take charge. And oftentimes those are take charge moments, right? When, kids are hurting each other or they're losing their minds, it is like, okay, enough, you hear, stop. And then at that point, right, it becomes a little bit easier. Your lid comes back on and you can decide. And I think there's no right answer. Mm-hmm. In any one of those scenarios, it's not like, okay, for sure, choose the 2-year-old. For sure, choose the 4-year-old. For sure. And I think what we just want to be noticed, what we want to notice in ourselves, is that we are often more inclined to partner with, to align with, to start first with the most regulated child. If you have more than one kid, you're likely to favor the one who has the calmer temperament, because they make you feel more confident.
Yeah.
And that's a normal thing that tends to happen all the time. I often talk about our Olivia, who is we have boy-girl twins, and Olivia is the only girl in our family. And I asked Jesus specifically for a daughter. And he said to me, you want her? You buckle up. So I got 2 boys who, put together, I would have 87,000 of those boys, because their temperament is calm and relaxed, much like their father. Olivia is a ball of fire who tests my will to keep myself in the game every single day. And I am so much easier able to keep my own lid on with the boys than I am with her. And so much of this is really about, okay, so when they're losing their minds, you're in the game. You know what to do first. Deep breath, mama, and let's decide. No, 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 no. Come here. Come on. And it's a triage, right? Like if you're in the world of first responders, it's a triage. You got to take the one who is going to cause the most damage in any situation and pull them out first.
Yeah.
That makes sense? And there's no right answer. There's not one single right answer in that process. You know your babies better than anybody on the planet, right? And you also know your history better than anybody on the planet. So pay close attention to how all those things mesh together, and you do the best you can with what you got on any given day, and it's enough. And you only have to get it right 30% of the time.
Yeah. It's funny because, yeah, we took him to a behavior therapist because we just kept having like kicking, hitting, all the things. And I remember it does feel this very weird dance, like you're saying, of loving, soothing, being in charge, whatnot. And I said to her, I was like, what do we do when just like the kicking, the screaming like hits off? And she's like, you got to hold him close to like get him to calm down. And I'm like, but if I was an outsider looking in, it looks a little violent, me holding him down. And she's like, that's okay. I'm like, really? Because you get in your own head about what it looks like.
Well, and I think sometimes it really depends on, the age of your child and, developmentally where they're at and all of those things. For me, the physical presence is sometimes safer. Yeah. And so even if I just say to you, baby, I'm not leaving, because you know what happens when you say smarten up or I'm leaving. Yeah. They never just pull it back together because they're scared and they need you to co-regulate with them. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes what I do is just really this. I mean, we did this last night with our daughter because there was a 45-minute friggin' disaster. Is like, okay, I'm staying right here. No, get out. Okay, I'm going to stay right here. I don't want to stay. Okay, mommy will sit. And sometimes I sit there for a long enough time, right? You can't regulate alone for long. Yeah. And so I'm a huge believer in timeouts for you, not them. Yeah. Because if you are at the end of your rope, then it is much better to say, I need a break, and they won't leave you. So you lock yourself in the bathroom and you put a bottle of white in the tank. But as long as they're safe, right? Yeah. That 30 seconds is what you need to be like, okay, he's 4. Come on. He's going to be in bed in an hour. Let's go. Let's step back in. Let's dance. Come on, little muffin. Right. Yeah. And his job right now, I mean, he's wired. Maybe it's a boy. Yep. So depending on what's going on for this guy, his temperament's a bit flippier. He's sensitive. He's probably really smart. All of these things kind of happen. So he's just, he's a sensitive dude. He's going to lose his mind all the time. That's his personal job right now. Yeah. And when mama is calm and when his dad is calm and everybody's filled up and they've had enough sleep, guess what? This kid, you're like, is that all you got today? That's it? Come on, let's dance. And it takes really a lot less time to help him regulate. And when you are exhausted and overwhelmed and questioning your competency as a parent, and maybe there's something really wrong with him, probably he got a brain injury that we're missing, all of these things that could potentially go wrong, then guess what happens to your heart rate? Yeah. Guess what happens to your tolerance? The story in your head is, holy shit, there is something really wrong with this kid. Oh my Jesus. And your baby is so tuned into his mama that he can smell that from the parking lot.
They smell fear. Yeah.
Oh, and yesterday I was with Olivia and it was like, I don't know, we were in like the 40th minute. All I wanted to do was go watch Breaking Bad. And I was like sitting in her bed and just like, sort of like, okay. She's like, it's not okay. And I'm like, I know, love. And then I just like, she screamed or did something again. And I was like, oh my God, Olivia, you're like, I don't, and then she gets so frustrated because I can't handle it. Mm-hmm. Right. And all she needs is me to walk her home through that process. Now I know that. I mean, I wrote a book about it, for God's sake. Yeah. I know that. But in the moment, keeping it together means I only have to do the best I can with what I got in that moment. And, it took us a lot longer. But as soon as I was able to take a break and calm down, then I was able to come back to her and she snuggled into bed. Yeah. But there was 45 minutes in there where a lot of things were said and some dolls were thrown and there was some kicking of the door and all of these things were happening. And her brothers finally said to me, Mom, could you just be nice? I was like, okay, listen, you know what? I do not need the peanut gallery here. Get out of your place.
Yeah.
Go back to your bed.
I'm so glad to hear this happens to experts as well, because I will have sat there with like train track bits being thrown at the door and you're just like, I'm trying to keep my cool and my shit together, but you're making it hard.
Totally. That is 100% normal. Here's the issue, right? Like, there'll be some kids if you have more than one kid, like, I cannot imagine Asher, our oldest, ever throwing anything.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot imagine that. I cannot imagine. Olivia came out chucking shit. Like, she was out of the gate like that, right? They're wired differently. They have different tolerances. They have different temperaments, all of these things. And we start to measure our capacity as a parent based on how the children respond. And there's so many factors that go into that process, right? They all require the exact same thing. Some just need it in different doses. Now, if they have developmental delay, if they have a trauma history, if they have a genetic condition, a neurological condition, all of those things are going to affect the way that they lose their minds. They all need the exact same thing, is us just to walk them home.
Yeah.
And the ones that take more from us means there just needs to be more wine, or,
yes.
I mean, not really, but like, it takes a village and a vineyard. That's our new saying around here. It takes a village and a vineyard.
I like it. For me, it would be a gin and tonic.
Right.
I have some listener questions because they just were rolling in. One of them that I found really interesting was, how do we know if our kids are actually self-regulating or if they're just internalizing their emotions? She said her son has recently started to bite his nails. He'll say he's upset and that he needs to calm down. He's 4. Does this mean he's regulating, or is the nail biting like a sign that something else is going around? Like, is he just mimicking the language that she's using?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, it's hard to really know. I think what's really important in that process, right, is that she knows that baby better than anybody on the planet. And so I would ask him. I would really sort of get him to name it, to tame it, right? Like, and so in those questions a little bit, or in that space a little bit, like, holy, what's going on? Mommy's noticing this, right? Yeah. What does it feel like? I don't know. Where do you feel it in your body? Right? Like, what does this feel like? Sometimes when mommy gets frustrated or scared, that's what I do. Are you scared about anything? And, pay close attention to whatever's happening in your family sometimes. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic and his routine has been turned on its head. Yeah. So sometimes just naming that for them. Hey, things have been different. Hey, we did lots of changes in this family. Hey, does it happen? I don't know what the situation is, right? But does it happen more when he's at dad's? Does it happen more when he's at mom's? Does it, like, all of those things doesn't mean that there's anything wrong in the situation. It's just a cue. All behavior has meaning. Yeah. So what is it about? And sometimes we assume that it's this, oh my gosh, this kid's an anxious max. Or, sometimes he's just he's got a sensitivity and he's really super sensitive. And so that's his soothing technique, right? We got, lots of kids who suck on their sleeves or their arms or their, their fingers and things like that. And sometimes kids just bite their nails. That's a way to calm themselves down. So what is that about? And if that's a behavioral issue, then we're sort of like, okay, how do we transfer that? Or, what would help? Or when does it happen the most? And, all of those things I think are great things to just have conversations, even with a 4-year-old.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. One of the other questions, and I think this person has a 3-year-old, the biters and the kickers, how do we help channel that frustration into maybe different positive stress management or self-regulation? Like, should they be screaming into a pillow? We're obviously with them, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. Is there anything we can channel that energy into that is less violent?
That's such a good question. I think what matters the most about this is not if you're going to teach, it's when. And we're often very inclined to teach in the moment. No, biting. Biting is bad. We don't hit. All of those things are very true. It is not if I'm going to have those discussions, it's when. So if safety is an issue and they're biting, they're hitting, right? It is that sense of no. Nope. You over here, not okay. We don't, right? But in that moment, I want to be able to regulate and calm down. I want to be able to get eyes. I want to be able to get them to take a drink or a snack because they get their prefrontal cortex back on quicker. And then I say, what was happening, right? When we get upset, right? We cannot bite, right? When we get upset, let's, what else can we do? Let's try this, buddy, right? You have to tell mommy or come and get a, all those things. And the thing is, it's not a one-off. It won't happen after one, parents say all the time, well, we tried it. Okay. So they have the prefrontal cortex is flipping all the time. You might have to try it 877 times, right? We got to go around that boat again. And okay. Right? You think about that. How many times do they flip their lid, 0 to 2? You don't just sort of calm them down once and then they're like, okay, 10-4, got it.
Yeah.
You got to go through it a million times to create those neural pathways. Make sense?
I found 0 to 2 not so bad. It's the fucking 4s, man. That's like what everyone warned me. And now I'm like, oh.
You were right.
Yeah. That's okay. So when you were saying some of those things that they could do instead, like when you were saying what are some of those things that we can do differently instead of biting? Like, can you give us a couple examples so we can try them out?
Well, I think what really matters is, in the book, we talked a little bit about this, right? Like um, when you are really connected to your babe, not in the moment of, of the lid flip or the disconnect, that's where it really matters. How do we show genuine interest in the things they care about? That really, gives us a lot of leverage when those hard moments come. Not if, but when those hard moments come. And I often think about this even like from a coaching perspective, right? Or a teacher. When you have built a relationship that's solid before the meltdown happens, you have much more capacity in the meltdown. So when you see kids at school who just lose their mind, they will go, they'll seek out to find specific teachers. They won't hit certain teachers if if they're hitters, primarily because they have a relationship with them. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I really want for you to think about is, how are you sort of leaning in, showing genuine interest in the things that kids love? And when you're an exhausted, overwhelmed parent, the last thing you want to do, for example, if you have a 7-year-old, is to learn Minecraft. The last thing you want to do is, if you have a 12-year-old, is to spend an hour playing Fortnite. Mm-hmm. But those are the things they love. That's their jam. And when you want to get your heart, I mean, it's just like you and me. When somebody's very interested in the things I love to talk about, those are my people. I want to spend more time with them. I start to value their opinion. I start to be more responsive if they say, you know what, Jody, here's what I was thinking.
Unless that thing is Love is Blind for you.
That's a whole other course, girl. Yeah. A whole other course. Anyway, I think that then the other thing that I think is really important in that moment is eye contact. Mm-hmm. And when you are distressed, no matter for what reason, your eyes will be down. And so when you think about anybody who's anxious or depressed, anybody who's lying, anybody who is in a state of grief or mourning, the first thing that goes is their eyes, their eye contact. And, we often say there's significant differences, cultural differences with respect to eye contact. It's not really true, actually, because, it is true, but the fundamental understanding of all of that is there's not a culture on this planet that doesn't make eye contact to socially reference. Yeah. This is true of kids on the autism spectrum, but they too make eye contact to judge safety. But what happens is if I can't get a kid's eyes, it's really important to me that that's where I start. Because when I can look at you, then I can start to sort of judge so much easier about, what's going on. Are you mad? Are you sad? Are you in pain? And we look all the time now, but we don't see because there's so many distractions. You're on your iPad, I'm on my phone. Before things have changed significantly in the last 6 weeks as we've been, more and more in people's physical spaces with people we love at home. But typically we're so disconnected mm-hmm. that we don't have the capacity to sort of to walk each other home through that. And I think that's just the thing I really want you to pay attention to, despite the fact that we are in each other's physical spaces, maybe more with our immediate families. Pay close attention to not only looking, but seeing, because eye contact is the first regulation. If I can get their eyes, then I can walk them home through this.
Yeah. And I think as hard as this time is right now, and it's so different for everyone, right? I can only speak for myself. We used to say, my husband and I, like, Monday morning, drop the kids off at day home. You were so pumped you survived the weekend. And then it was like, oh, amazing. We actually went 2 weeks with them at home, and it wasn't all like sunshine and roses. But I was like, but we did it. Like, we have right? the ability to survive it.
Right?
Yeah.
I know. I just feel so much about that. It's like, then the other thing we talk about a lot is like, where's the joy in this situation? Because there's been such a big change. How often have we really slowed down enough to still, belly laugh with the babies? I truly think, Victoria, when I think about this, is that we're going to want this time back. It's not going to be long where we were like, remember what that was like when we really didn't have anything, to rush to? Yeah. My God, I'd give anything to be back there. So I just really don't want us to miss it.
Yeah, I do feel for the parents. Like, I know a few parents that both of them are still working at home with kids, and like the number of, like, they almost have less time than they've ever had before. So I do, like, every situation is so different, but at the same time, they are getting some of those moments that they, normally their childcare providers would see or the educators would see. And so,
totally.
So yeah, it is picking up on those things. One of the other questions I had was, is it common for new fears to arise with the stress of COVID? One of the listeners talked about her kids suddenly being afraid of insects. She did say specifically the word bug, so she's not sure if there's like, how do I know if they keep hearing this, if it's because we're saying this bug is going around and now they're like, it's an insect, or is it just they've suddenly become afraid of insects? Like, how do we,
How do you
yeah.
know? I would say nothing is really a coincidence. And when everybody is heightened around these little babies, they tend to get heightened too. And developmentally, it is not uncommon to go through periods of fear, right? Where like mommy's going to die or bugs are going to kill us or like all of these kind of things. And I think what starts to happen is we start to panic. Like, is there something going on with this kid? Is this the start of OCD? Like, oh my God, we're in big trouble. When the angst around us is increasing and people are worried about bugs and people about, worrying about dying, your kids are going to be anxious too. So how do we name it? How do we say, tell me more? What are you worried about? What's your biggest worry? And when you can hold some space for it before you try to fix it, then you get a better understanding about where it's coming from, right? And no matter how little they are, help me tell me more. And see what happens. And then we just respond the best we can with what we got, right? And fearful, flipping your lid, being, concerned about disconnect or separating from each other is a normal response. And how we respond to it is most important.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because it is that like we can't get inside their brains and understand everything. And they're
Yeah.
all at different levels of how well they can communicate with us. So yeah, no, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm very conscious of time. So before we move into the final 5 questions that I ask all of my guests, you've got a couple new programs coming out that I would love you to tell our listeners about.
Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, so we're so excited about this. So we've done this big shift. For a long time, I was on the road so much, and we had talked about doing an online course, and so that there is, material ready all the time. I do lives every morning during this pandemic. So on our Facebook and Instagram page every morning at 8:15, I jump on and do half an hour of whatever sort of is in the world. And then we've put together an online course for kids these days. And so there's, I think, 8 modules and different things about it. So we launched that. The pre-sale starts tomorrow, and then it goes out into the world on May 1st. So I'm super excited about that. It's great for PD and yeah, so I'm excited about that. And then I was also telling you about we're doing a course around grief and loss, because so many people are really have so many questions about, how do we navigate this period of we've lost so much. And so a funeral director, a friend of mine named Jeremy Allen, who's a rock star, he and I are going to jump on and do a seminar, a course, and it's $25 a ticket. And you jump online with us for 2 hours in May 16th, I think.
Wow.
Is the date. Yeah, so we got all of that information. So I'll send you all the links for that.
That's awesome. And did I hear, so I've got many friends who are teachers, which is how I found out about you in the first place. And did I hear there's going to be a teachers these days coming
Yes,
out?
Yes, ma'am. We're really excited. Lori, when does this launch? Because I'm going to be
April. What is next Thursday?
May
1st?
Yeah, that's awesome. I can't wait. The course goes live that day. But yeah, Lori McIntosh and I, who's Mrs. Max Kinders on Instagram, she's a phenomenal educator. So we're going to write teachers these days together. So we just, if you're on our email list and you're an educator, we send out, I'd love to know what you're doing in the classroom. I'd love to know, how you're walking kids home from relationship, trauma stuff. And we want to put it in the book so that teachers have a lot of resources, with the kids these days, sort of philosophy infused through it all. So yeah, we're super excited about that. That'll come out, I think, in January.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I have to say, I know Kids These Days is written for educators, but as a parent, I still got so much from it. So I think it's something everyone needs to read.
I love it. Thank you.
So final 5, which are kind of quick fire. The first thing, what are some things or projects that get you really fired up, but in a good way?
Oh my God. Okay. So the thing I'm fired up about the most right now is probably these web courses. Cause I was so reticent to do them before because I was like, nope, I'm all about face-to-face connection. I'm not putting any shit online. I really want people to come and create a community. And what, the Corona has really given us, I think, is just how much you can create a community online. Mm-hmm. And then how we're going to just use this as a platform to stay connected face-to-face once this is all over. So that's exciting for me. And so we've done one for teachers, but I'm now creating the content for first responders and their spouses. And so that that's just keeping me up at night. I'm so excited.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What's the most inspiring book that you've read in the past few years?
Hands down, without a doubt, it's Brene Brown. I would say my favorite of all time is Darren Greatly. But as a leader, our team has grown really quickly over the last year, and Dare to Lead is the philosophy I die on. So anything by Brene changes my life.
Yeah, her new podcast is phenomenal.
I know.
Yeah.
I love it. Yes, it's so good. I've learned so much from her.
Yeah. What are some of your go-to strategies for handling stress?
I think, what used to be a thing for me, like I would work out. I mean, I can't even tell you how many marathons or half marathons, never full. And I used to work out all the time to try to keep this Ukrainian chassis in check and get skinny. And now as I'm 44, and I just realized how important it is to move my body. And not in any way to make me skinny, but really just like if I can even get 20 minutes on a treadmill, I'm a different human being. And I don't do it all the time. I don't do it nearly enough because everything trumps that. Like, all the kids were in the bed, or I washed my hair yesterday, so I don't really want to work out, So there's so many times where I have to get serious about that. But I think that is like my number one thing. And I really pay attention to who I surround myself with.
Yeah. It's so funny. I've been saying this to everyone over the past 5 or 6 weeks. I work in stress reduction, but I always say that doesn't mean I don't get stressed. Like that would be unrealistic. And I found like my heart racing at moments. And those are the moments where I'm like, no, I have to go do a workout. And it, exactly like you're saying, is not for how I look or the COVID-19 or any of that. It is just to get that heart in check so that I can then manage my day and not flip my lid at everyone in my household.
Totally, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's brilliant.
What's the best life lesson that you've learned or advice that you've been given?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so that one's easy to me. The one that comes straight to my mind is don't fix it. And I had a mentor when I was at the Children's Hospital. His name is Paul Oliphant, and I wonder all the time if this guy knows how much he changed my life. But I've been such a fixture my whole life, in our family and certainly in our marriage and as a parent. Like, here's the answers. Just let me do it. Move over. I got it. And I think, Paul gave me this feedback all the time within a clinical setting. And then it just sort of became such the mantra for me for life is how do you not fix it? How do you just hold space? You don't have the answers for everything. And it's not about what you say. Of course, Maya Angelou and many other people said this, but it's not what you say. It's how you make people feel. So Stephen Covey also said, seek first to understand before being understood. And so I think that's the biggest, that's such a superpower. If you can just hold space for people first, and the people who need it the most are the hardest to give it to.
Yeah. And the final question, Jody, is what does it mean to you to live your best life?
Oh my gosh. What it means to me is that I'm spending time with people who make me want to be better. And the COVID has really taught me it's not about where you're at, it's who you're with. And I think that I am pleasantly surprised how much time I love spending time with my children, how much I value my team, how much I miss the physical presence of my two best friends. And it's so much less about, what we're doing and really what they do for my soul. So I think living my best life means surrounding myself with the people who just make me want to be better every day.
Yeah. I love it. Well, I highly recommend that everyone check out your online courses, your book, and on social media, you're doing a little thing, hashtag not today corona. You tell
Good
a little
job.
bit about how people what the purpose of that is and how they can get involved?
Yeah, it's so funny. Just before the lockdown of our world happened, I had went to a comedian who's a good friend of mine named Joe Dombrowski. He's an educator, and he opened his set by saying like, "Corona, who's scared of the corona?" And I started every morning then coming on being like, "Not today, corona," because I used to say to my children all the time, like, "Not today, Satan. Like, you're not going to win. I am very appreciative of the fact that the devil is trying to push us around here, and I am not going to lose my mind on you." And so when Corona came, we were all like, "Not today. Nuh-uh. You are not going to steal the joy. Even though we can't be with each other, you're still not going to win." And so we've really encouraged our community just to do that with each other and say, "Not today, Corona," and to take pictures and, send us the things they're doing to stay connected in their community and with their families, and to not let this stupid virus push us around.
Yeah. Well, it gives me light every day when I check my Instagram feed. So thank you so much for all the work that you do and for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, girlie.